We are live.
We are live. Great. Welcome, everybody. This is a startup in residence training on innovative procurement solutions. My name is Judy Brown. I'm with Civic Makers. We're a civic innovation consultancy working with the Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation and the Department of Technology on these education and training programs for startup in residence. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rob Henny. Great.
You didn't see that. Thanks, Judy. Hi, everyone. My name is Rob Henning. I'm one of the Mayor's Executive Fellows, currently based within the Office of Contract Administration, working on a series of really interesting procurement-related projects. We're really thrilled to have you here today, and for those of you who can't join in person, we're glad that you've been able to join online. We hope that all of you come away from the session with at least one new lesson related to procurement that will make your lives easier. So, that said, we're delighted to have Coco Domingo with us from the Office of Contract Administration. She is the Assistant Director within OCA. She's practically a walking encyclopedia of procurement-related knowledge, so we're thrilled to have her today. Once she's given her introductory remarks, we're then going to have four presenters. We're going to each cover a specific topic related to how we can deal with some of the thornier procurement challenges that we encounter on a daily basis. After the presenters have delivered their talk, we're going to open it up to Q&A. Really hope we get some terrific questions from you. If you're dealing with some thorny procurement challenges that you want to discuss, please do so. I have all handy here with me. I'm not afraid to use on the sugar, you have to participate. So with that said, please welcome Domingo.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Coco Domingo. I'm the Assistant Director at OCA. We're very excited to be a part of this program. We have worked with them and collaborated with them. And we are excited that the city is moving in this direction. And we just wanted to remind everyone that, OCA is here, understanding that there's new directions away with regards to technology, things that are helping, make us more productive and more efficient around the city. Things that we are also very excited about. And so we don't want to be a roadblock to that. We want to be participating, we want to know about it. In fact, the climate is for us to move towards collaboration in the beginning, so that it doesn't seem like we're roadblocking because some of the city requirements are not being met. As most of you know or may not know, part of our job at OCA, we delegate some of the purchasing out there, but part of our job is just to make sure that city rules, city policies, that we are in charge of checking and balancing the orders out there, that those are being followed, or we are there to train people. And so our preference always is for you to talk to us in the beginning rather than towards the end. And so again, like I said, we've had the opportunity to work with them to create a procurement process that will help bring this new innovation to the city. And I'll be here to answer any more questions. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Coco. Okay. So why are we hosting this session? Why does procurement even matter? The reason is that, well, procurement matters to the taxpayer, it matters to city employees, and it matters a lot to city vendors. Every year, cities spend billions and billions of dollars procuring goods and services. And we think the processes that cities use for procurement are ripe for innovation. In this part of the world, we hear the word disruption a lot. Every entrepreneur out there wants to disrupt some sort of stagnant or existing industry. Maybe it's time to start thinking about how we can disrupt government procurement. Next slide.
It's going. Just got to keep
really?
talking. Yeah.
Taking its time.
Yeah. There's a lag. Apologies.
So, terrific. Many people think that shopping for the government is hard. I can't imagine why. You get this massive credit card. It's just so easy to use. The reality is you have to understand the administrative code or find someone who can explain it to you. Very often you have to write complex, detailed specifications. Once you put them out into the real world, you know that a lot of average people will never be able to comprehend them. You have to issue RFPs in crowded marketplaces with little marketing support. You have to assemble review committees and get those moved by relevant departments within the city hall. And occasionally you have to engage anchors who are not happy with the terms and conditions in RFPs or with the way specifications being out. What's not to love about government procurement? It sounds like everything. So the good news is that there are some solutions out there that will hopefully make your life easier and we can worthwhile exploring today. So with that said, I'm going to hand it to Ruth, and she will talk about results of the contract.
Great. Hi everyone, my name is Ruth. I am a Government Innovation Fellow with the Howard County School Government Lab. But we are an organization that provides pro bono technical assistance to governments, state and local governments across the country that are trying to improve the results they achieve with their contract dollars. Focus specifically for the most part on social services contracts, although we do have some experience in other realms. And the way that we help governments is to embed fellows like myself with the government for a period of 6 to 18 months typically. And so I have been working here in City Hall for the last roughly a year. I've been working on a few different projects, but one of the projects that I've been working on is a part of an initiative called What Works Cities, which is funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. And its goal is to help 100 mid-sized cities across the country over a period of 3 years to better use data and evidence to run their cities. And so as part of that, the Government Performance Lab is helping 20 cities, including San Francisco, do what we call results-driven contracting. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a second, but the basic idea is to help cities use data and evidence to improve their health safety with their contracted dollars. And so this is the slightly outdated now, but map of other projects that we're working on in addition to San Francisco. We also do some other work, including Pay for Success, which I'm happy to talk about outside of this. I don't know if anyone wants to get So results-driven contracting is sort of an umbrella term to refer to a group of strategies that help cities improve the results they're achieving for contracts. And it goes all the way from the actual procurement through the setting up the contract and then managing the contract. And so what we're focusing on here today is specifically procurement. And so again, I'm happy to talk later about any of the other sort of steps of the process, but I'm going to focus right now on the procurement piece, which really is looking at how to better define the goals that you're trying to achieve with procurement and use that to improve the results. So, problem-based procurement. This is, again, one of the strategies that we use, and the idea behind, go back. The idea behind problem-based procurement is that the status quo of procurement, as Rob was just explaining, is typically that governments provide a large number of very detailed specification requirements about what they would like to buy with that procurement. And the problem with this is often that the thing that the government would like to buy is not always well defined. It's not always pencils and desks. And so the problem-based procurement is really supposed to step in on some of these more complex procurement challenges, where the thing you're trying to buy is not necessarily well defined. And so one of the problems that cities we've worked with have encountered in doing these more complex procurements are that listing out in great detail sort of what the specifications are presents three challenges. One is that having overly narrow specifications often excludes more innovative solutions from coming to fore in the procurement process. Another is that the government may not be the actor that's in the best position to figure out what solution would give it a problem is. You know, government, we do a lot to work with the private sector in many different ways, and there may be ideas that the government isn't yet aware of that are out there. And the last is that for these complex problems, the solution might best be achieved in some sort of iterative process, or it may be that no one really knows right now exactly what the right solution is, but in working together, it can come up. So the idea behind problem-based procurement is to rethink the procurement process to focus on defining the problem as an outcome rather than finding the inputs into the solution you want. Okay. And so I just wanted to walk you through a quick example. This is an excerpt from an RFP that helped the state of Rhode Island's Department of Children and Families put out. And Rhode Island is having a big problem with their in-home child placement services and out-of-home placement as well. And so they were wanted to redesign how they procured all of these services. And what we helped them do was to step back and rather than listing out all of the different types of services that they wanted to buy, to determine what it was that they wanted to achieve. And so this you can see is sort of outcome matrix of what they wanted to achieve. And you can tell that these goals are things that can be achieved by buying a host of services. It's not kind of one intervention, but things like safely preventing into out-of-home care and congregate care settings. There are a number of interventions that they could use for that. And so this is really the first step, is just first identifying the problem area, and then identifying really what it is that you want to achieve through this procurement. Okay, next slide. Okay. And then second part of the problem-based procurement is to define boundaries of what it is that you want to buy in order to achieve those goals. And so that's this very small point. But the sort of unique thing about what they did in Rhode Island were to, first they had listed the description, which includes the goals of the services again, and then suggested possible program elements as well as historic model and other options that they haven't historically listed. But it doesn't, in no way does it say, does it list out, you know, you must have one master's of social work, you must have 18 hours of this type of intervention and 20 hours of this type of intervention, which is very common in these types of procurements. And so that's really the basic idea, is just to step back and define it by the goals rather than the inputs, and to put some kind of boundaries, suggest some kind of possibilities to the problem, and then invite a wide variety of participants to apply and work with you to craft the right solution. And get more into sort of what goes into that process, but I just kind of wanted to quickly give you the overview of what this looks like. And then I just wanted to dive a little bit more into kind of, Rob started talking about some common procurement challenges, and I just wanted to, based on our work, give you a few other ideas for when this type of procurement, this problem-based procurement, might be helpful for you. Let's go to the next slide. So the first is one thing we found with our cities is that a lot of them don't really specify the goals of their procurement, and they don't structure the procurement in a way that they're going to end up being able to meet those goals. And so the obvious benefit of problem-based procurement is it forces you to do that from the start. The second is that the city might often be focused on compliance and transactional issues rather than on the performance of the procurement. And the process of going through a problem-based procurement kind of has you identify what the outcomes are from the start and set you up to manage based on those outcomes, to manage your contracts based on those outcomes. The third problem is that doing business with the city as owners, for contractors, for all the reasons that Rob just described. And I think problem-based procurement tries to simplify that. And a lot of the examples that we've seen, not only do they sort of flip this process of procurement on its head, but they also use simpler language and, just try to simplify the procurement as much as possible, make it look pretty. And then the last thing is the city doesn't strategically manage its portfolio of procurements. And I think one of the ways problem-based procurement can help with that is to force you to just identify what the problem is from the start. And if somebody either in the Office of Contract Analysis or the equivalent centralized procurement office, or the departments individually sort of identify what they think their key strategic procurements are coming out over the next 5 years, then you can think about how to identify where the problems are in those, and try to think about sort of this new model, this sort of inverted model of procurement. So that's what I've got. Happy to answer questions later.
Thanks, Ruth. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, cooperative purchasing. So here's a fun fact. Every single pain point that you have encountered in government procurement is a pain point that is experienced by cities and state governments around the country. For several decades now, procurement experts have been looking for ways to alleviate the frustrations that exist in government procurement. And those efforts have resulted in the creation of a lot of purchasing cooperatives around the country. What are purchasing cooperatives? They're typically non-profit or administrative governmental entities that are set up for the sole purpose of creating contracts that governments and non-profits can piggyback off of. There are at least 20 purchasing cooperatives or consortiums in the USA that cater specifically to the needs of government entities, schools, and non-profits. A couple of examples here: the National Joint Powers Alliance, the Board Cooperative Purchasing, and the Houston-Galveston Area Council Procurement Consortium. Many of these entities specialize in specific types of commodities and services. So some cooperatives will focus on healthcare services and commodities. Some will focus on relatively uncomplicated commodities like stationery and IT. And then others will focus on really big ticket capital intensive items such as vehicles and infrastructure requirements. Next slide, please. So the benefits of cooperative purchasing: number one, they can save you a lot of time. Typically, you will leave it up to the agency to write the detailed specifications. They'll put the specifications in the RFP out into the marketplace. They will manage the competitive bidding process. Those contracts that they establish with the vendors that have applied will then be available for government entities around the country to leverage and piggyback. This can save you a lot of money as well. If you think about aggregating all of that demand, that aggregated demand can be used to drive down the price of goods and services that are made available through these contracts. They also offer a lot of flexibility. There is no requirement for you to use a cooperative. Cities can determine when it makes best sense for them to leverage these particular arrangements, so it's an incredibly flexible tool to use. Just an example of a city that we know of that has used cooperative purchasing to its advantage, City of Portland. A couple of years ago, they were really struggling with staffing shortages within their procurement function. Their fire department had a lot of pressing needs that they needed to address. They simply did not have the staff to write the detailed specifications that they wanted for the department. So instead of going out into the marketplace and hiring additional individuals to work within their procurement team, they reached out to the Houston-Galveston Area Council Purchasing Consortium, and they were able to leverage over 30 contracts that have already been established with marketplace that focus on providing fire departments with the goods and services that they need. So it was a great outcome for the City of Portland, and hopefully it's something that you can think about leveraging as you're doing work in your department. So what are the steps that you need to follow if you're interested in piggybacking off of a purchasing consortium that is out there in the marketplace? The first thing to do is check your administrative code to make sure that you understand the legal requirements. So for the purposes of this example, if you're based in San Francisco, as Section 21.16 of the Administrative Code gives the city purchaser and the city the authority to actually piggyback off of a cooperative purchasing contract. What you'll need to show, though, is that that purchasing cooperative awarded their contracts through a process that was competitive or through a sole source award. And you'll also need to show that using that cooperative agency's procurement process will be in the city's best interest. Next step is just following on from what Kofa said, reach out to your central purchasing team or OCA in the case of San Francisco and consult with them. They'll be able to give you a better sense of whether or not piggybacking off that contract will run into some friction, especially if you have local business enterprise requirements, as we do in San Francisco. The reality is that OCA will be far more amenable to piggybacking if the good and service that you want to purchase cannot be sourced from a local supplier within the boundaries of the county. Next slide. The third step is to do your homework. So if you get buy-in from OCA to actually piggyback off of this contract, reach out to the co-op, ask to see the RFP that they put into the marketplace to award the contract, ask to see all of the related bid documentation as well, review all that paperwork and look for any red flags that might make OCA nervous or might make the city attorney nervous. Then do some number crunching. You really need to be able to prove to OCA that piggybacking off this contract will save the city money relative to actually putting the bid out ourselves. So do a high-level numerical analysis to show that by piggybacking off this contract, you will save the city hard dollars. And then incorporate that into a 1 or 2 page justification memo that can be shared with the city purchaser, outlining all of your thoughts as to why this makes sense for the city to use. Finally, remember vendor registration requirements. This is particularly relevant if you're in San Francisco and you have to deal with equal benefits ordinance. You don't want to go all the way down the pathway of issuing a purchase order to a vendor that has been awarded a contract and then discover that they can't get through 12B certification. So make sure they can get through the vendor registration process before you issue the purchase order. Right, Krista.
Thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Krista Kanalakis. I'm the Deputy Innovation Officer for the Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation. And I'm going to talk to you today about a procurement model that we call the procurement bus. It really started with the mayor, actually. The mayor really made a call to action for how can we bring more entrepreneurs into government? How can we bring some of our greatest minds and talent and companies to work with us inside city government to help solve some of our biggest pain points and needs of government and really kind of bring government into the 21st century. So how we started with this is through our Startup in Residence program. So this is, this was kicked off in 2014 last year. We had these 6 different departments participating. So in this case, we had 1 city and 6 city departments. We did an open call for solutions based on the needs that were identified by these departments. And then startups applied for this program. In this first year, we had no procurement pathway established. So we didn't set expectations for what would happen after the end of the program because we said, we don't know, this was an experiment. It was the first year. We didn't know what kind of outcomes we would get. And so we didn't want to, require the city to work with them or have any we just didn't know what this department would need in that case. But what we found was that the startups in collaboration with the city staff were really able to get far within a 16-week program and produce a prototype and an outcome that the department was potentially interested in moving forward with. But what they said was, we haven't set that up from the beginning, and so it was a challenge. Just to give one example, in the case of SFO Airport, within that 16-week period, a startup came in and mapped out all of the assets of the airport. It was 500 points of interest, placed little beacons all over Terminal 2, and were able to build a working prototype within 16 weeks. When you look at this example, at the end of the program, we had this great demonstration of the app. It was an app for the blind and visually impaired to help them navigate around the airport. When you look a year and a half later, the pilot wasn't able to be scaled, and the airport has cited some procurement challenges, but also it just wasn't established how that partnership could kind of translate into a longer term arrangement with the city. So this was a key challenge that we heard from departments that we needed to solve for in our second year. And so in 2016, we wanted to address this head on. We also wanted to scale the program regionally. So this year we have 4 cities and 17 city challenges. And in this case, how do you scale? We wanted to do one RFP, but it was really difficult to manage 17 challenges in one, right? So how can we actually make that process happen if each of the cities, is potentially interested in having a procurement arrangement after the program? So we've worked very closely with OCA and with the city attorney to design a process whereby the startups that were applying for these 17 city challenges were actually going through all the steps of a formal procurement process in the process of them applying for the Startup in Residence program. So in that sense, we kind of grouped those challenges into one solicitation. And so we're calling this so in this case, with 4 cities, 17 challenges, but we only had one RFP. So we grouped them all together. And just to illustrate kind of the value of that, if you can think of it today what we're doing is very much like a single car driver. Each procurement is its own sort of vehicle that's moving forward. And so to manage all of that, it really takes it's very inefficient and kind of it's a big strain on resources. But if you think of it this way, like a bus, how can we think about a mass transit option for procurement? So in this case, by grouping all several procurements together, you can sort of spread the costs of administering one RFP over multiple outcomes. So that's what we did here. And so the first lesson is just to group them. Figure out ways to group different RFPs into one, sort of spread out those costs. The second lesson we learned is how can we use technology to really enable the process? So if you can imagine trying to manage 17 RFPs, 17 responses, 17 different selection committees for each of those. I mean, it adds up to, dozens and dozens of interactions, and in a normal situation, it would be potentially hundreds of emails to manage it. So it's basically unmanageable. So what we did in our case is we introduced a technology called Screen Door to help us to manage the process. So some key things of this tool, we have, you can see here, we've listed, this is the RFP document with all the formal language that we're presenting to potential bidders. But we're making the landing page friendly. So like Ruth said, how do you kind of welcome people to work with the city and write it in plain language versus kind of scaring them off with this government legalese from the get-go. So this was a respondent. This is sort of the RFP evaluator's view of each response. In this case, you can easily kind of assign responses to different teams automatically. So you don't have to send emails to all the different teams. You just basically use technology to assign the right responses so that only the right people can see those responses. And then you can also have multiple entities look at those responses. So in this case, we had Oakland and San Francisco both looking at a similar response. And you can set status. So it's really almost this management dashboard tool for an RFP process. It also just helped, basically I was the one that was managing this, and having this tool actually made it possible because you can actually see the status of the RFP just by looking at here. So you can see here the number of ratings for this response. So for example, if enough people have done their job of doing the rating. And then you can also, you can see here what the overall rating is. So you can kind of see how different responses are doing related to each other. This is just a screenshot of the selection committee tool. So these are, this is the selection committee for two of the different departments, and you can have specific statuses. So something that's really important is procurement is kind of making sure that you're really careful about who's seeing what. So you can assign, different levels of permission for different users on the account. And finally, we really want to reduce friction to really broaden the pool of applicants who are working with the city. So one thing we've heard from the department is we never get responses from local small businesses because the lift that's required to respond to a government RFP is so difficult that it's just, they're steering clear of that process. So this tool, we made it, in this case, we made it really simple. It takes 30 to 60 minutes to apply. And we also, it's online, so it can easily be shared widely. And then also, we're even allowing people to save their response and go back. So really thinking about how to make it easier for people to respond to this to the city. And then finally, this is a document that we worked on very closely with Rob from OCA, and really trying to demystify some of the process of working with city government. So we made it really clear, answering some of the most frequently asked questions, both for the program and for the process, just to really make it simple so that people can really dive in and and these are just some of the sort of testimonials I've heard from people who participated in the process. They felt like we made it so easy. We're now getting asked by other departments, like, can we do this for any other kind of procurement, or is it just this program? So we're now exploring that. I would love to hear from some of you if you're interested in this. And this was pointed out earlier, and yeah, someone said this is going to save me a bazillion emails. So with that it just shows that it's saving people time and energy. Okay, Ashley. Can I change it this one?
Yeah. On me.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm going to stand here because I've got my notes on my computer. So what I'm going to talk about today is how to procure a particular kind of software development professional services when you need custom software built. So this might be for a website or an interactive web application when you want to deliver a public service online, or it might be something that is not going to face the public but is actually for your staff to use when you're hiring consultants or vendors to build software. And the first sort of part I want to explain is about sort of a new approach to software development. There we go. That has become sort of the industry standard. And then the tricky question is, how do we in government buy those services? So traditional software procurement, both in the private sector originally and definitely still in the public sector, uses a form of product development called waterfall. And it often doesn't work. Like, we see the results of government software procurements all around us, and we also hear about them in the news. One of the biggest ones in the last couple of years was the failure of healthcare.gov, and they spent over $1 billion on a website, and it didn't work for the first 3 or 4 months, and it almost caused the failure of the president's one of his most major policy initiatives, healthcare reform. And when you dig deeper into the numbers, it's pretty clear that this is happening all throughout government at every level, federal, state, and local, and it's not just a federal thing, and it wasn't just this one project. Some studies are showing that about 94% of federal IT projects fail, meaning they're over budget, they're delivered late, or they never launch at all. And I think everyone in the room probably senses that might be true for a lot of software projects at the state and local level as well. And so where does that sort of come from, that issue? A lot of it has to do with how we manage software development. So this is the sort of old school way of developing software. It emerged in the 80s and 90s based on existing best practices for project management, and it's typically referred to as waterfall. And it's a linear process, starting with analysis and going all the way through to usually one major launch or deployment, often 2 or 3 years later, and then it might start all over again to do improvements or a next phase. When folks procure this, they typically do the first portion in-house. Yeah, just click my animations. Keep going. And then they write an RFP for the rest of it. It's usually a single RFP with a single contract. And you do a really exhaustive statement of work where you try to describe everything you need in the software. Every page of the website, all the menus, all the features, all the security needs. And that statement of work is usually focused on product requirements.
And then there's often also a maintenance contract that is sometimes for the whole life of the software, going back to that same company or a different company to maintain it. So what does this look like from a procurement standpoint? Go ahead. Keep going. Yeah. Okay, so often there's a huge RFP. Obviously, this is joking, but like 80, 90, 100 pages long, because what the staff member is trying to do is to capture everything they need, because this is their one opportunity to describe everything that's needed in the software. And even though it's 80 or 90 pages long, it actually doesn't have everything you need, because software is really complicated and hard. It results in this like exact price quote, usually for tens of millions of dollars, sometimes over $100 million for a piece of software. And the vendor is just making kind of like a wild guess. They are taking on a lot of risk, since they often are padding that number. And it usually results in a timeline that is like 4 or 5 years long. So it's like gonna cost you a ton of money, and we'll launch it in like 4 or 5 years. And anyone in the room who works with technology knows that software is gonna change a lot by 2020. And like, we actually have no idea what we need to deliver that solution in 4 years. So the good news is that we don't have to solve this problem. The private sector already has. Silicon Valley no longer uses waterfall development for software. Waterfall development, that linear line you saw, it works for building cars and building bridges and hardware projects. Like, it's not that you want to throw it out completely. It just doesn't work for building user-oriented software interfaces that are going to be used by real people. So there's this practice that emerged in the 70s called Agile, like even almost before waterfall sort of entered the software world. And then about 10 or 15 years ago became really concretely sort of defined, called Agile methodology. And it's now the industry standard best practice in the private sector at companies that you have heard of that work, delivering consumer web products. And what it does is takes that long software development cycle and turns it into these small little chunks that actually happen really fast. Like every 2 to 4 weeks, you are taking a tiny piece of the software, designing it and building it, and actually it's ready to go. You can test it. It's already built in that 2 weeks. And so it takes that big RFP and slices it up. And this really reduces risk, because you're not trying at the beginning when you write your scope or your product requirements to figure out everything that you're going to need. And you don't have to like do guesswork about what's needed, because you're going to be testing with real users as you go to inform your design. So works really well, is much more likely to result in efficient use of resources, efficient use of time and money, and produce things that users actually want. So the question then, go ahead. So some of the benefits I've summarized are these: faster timelines, you're reducing risk, you have more collaboration, you save money. What is this good for? Custom things built from scratch, customizing something that you're buying, so like a system that already exists, but you know that it needs to be modified. And then if you have existing software that you want to expand or update, it's also a good fit for that. So then the question inside government is, how do we buy Agile? So first of all, we know that we're not going to be able to write the 80 or 100 page scope. We have to slice it up into small pieces, and we're actually not going to write it ahead of time at all. We're going to work with the vendor to write it as we go. We are going to focus on only the near future. You might sketch out your product roadmap, but really you're focused on what are we going to build in the next 3 to 6 months. And then the big question, and the one I want to talk about in my last few slides, is how do we pay for it? Because this doesn't lend itself to the fixed price, fully defined scope that Waterfall does, which we know doesn't work, but we still have to figure out what to do with the new way. So when we started working on this with the city for the affordable housing portal, which we're doing with the Office of Housing and Community Development, it's to allow people to search and apply for affordable housing online. We knew we wanted to do Agile development, but we didn't know how to do the RFP or the contract. So we reached out to some folks inside of government who are already doing Agile at the White House, the U.S. Digital Service, and 18F, which is a digital agency at the federal GSA, and asked them, okay, we know you're doing Agile, we know you're putting out RFPs and doing Agile projects, but how do you contract for it? Like, how do you write the scope and write the contract for this? And so they shared with us some options, which I'll share with you today. So the first thing is that an Agile RFP is really different. Instead of trying to write out everything the software is going to have, which could mean, again, everything your website's going to have, everything your app is going to have, everything your online parking permit service is going to have, instead of trying to write that out, you really focus your RFP on the services you want delivered. So you want user research, you want design services, you want prototyping and user testing, you want front-end and back-end web development, you want product management, and you want all of that delivered in an Agile framework by a team that really understands Agile development. And you still might sketch out what you're building, because that's obviously important to someone who's responding. But it's really less about the requirements and more about the skill set you're looking for. It's kind of like if you were hiring like nurses or some other skilled practitioner. You don't define in that they're gonna like go in the patient's room and like change the things they're gonna do. Instead, you say we need skilled nurses or we need skilled practitioners. And then go ahead. So the response that they get back will be focused on their expertise and how they approach software development in an agile way. And then they're going to propose who they'd put on the team, what skill sets, how big the team would be, and then how they would actually do those smaller chunks of work, which we call sprints. How long would they be, and how much do they propose charging for that unit of work? And then, of course, you want to see examples of past work. And so then when you move to the contract, you have two basic choices, fixed price and time and materials, or an hourly rate, which isn't different from how you've probably seen other contracts, but what you're buying in the fixed price is a little bit different. So with Agile fixed price, instead of doing fixed price for the scope, you are doing fixed price for units of engineering work, which we refer to as stories. And stories are measured in a very quantitative, established, defined way so that you can measure the unit of engineering or design work that the firm delivers. And you will also want to define what it means for them to turn over a completed story. So for example, if one of your stories is like, users can export a report of all of their transactions in the last month, they're going to size that story. It might be 1 point or 2 points, and it'll have pricing associated with that. And you're also going to define what it would mean to be done. So like the export has to download in the correct file format. Like all of the data needs to be there. The export button should look like this wireframe. And you write those stories as you go. And you don't pay the vendor until the stories are delivered to meet satisfaction. So another way to think of this is that it's kind of like when you do fixed price for your big waterfall RFP, except you do it in these tiny chunks as you go with them. You do it every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks. And you have a commitment from the vendor that they will always be moving at the same pace, and you can actually even incentivize them to code and design faster. And then the other way to do this, which some folks at the federal level are using instead of fixed price, is to do time and materials, and they pay an hourly rate that usually varies based on particular skill sets, which is something you guys might be familiar with from professional services contracts. You can still have a predictable burn rate, like a price per sprint, which would be every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks. And that's based on stabilizing your team size and the hours you're using. And if you're working with a skilled Agile team, you're still going to get a predictable rate of work delivered every 2 to 4 weeks. The key, if you're doing Agile time and materials, I think we've learned and what I've heard from other counterparts in government is finding a vendor who is a skilled Agile practitioner, who's already practicing Agile methodology, who's used to doing this with their other customers, who has an established project and product management workflow around this, and has good references for it. You don't want to be experimenting with working in an Agile way with a vendor and then paying an hourly rate, because your ability to hold them accountable is less strict. I think that's my last slide. Yeah. So the questions.
Thanks, Ashley. We're going to open it up to a Q&A, and by all means, if you're dealing with challenging procurements and you'd like to pick our brains or pick Coco's brains, please stick up your hand, and we welcome discussion on some of the topics.
I'm sorry for your name.
Ashley.
Ashley. So in terms of how does Agile look like, okay, so opposed to doing like a linear waterfall, big RFP, going out once. So if you're doing these smaller amounts, how does that happen? That makes more paperwork and more like, what amounts are you doing? Because if we go over 10K, we have to do like a bigger process. How does that look like? Are you still doing a big money amount and then you're breaking it down?
Yeah, in my experience, what we're doing and what I've heard from others doing is that the contract covers the whole body of work, which could be like 6 months or a year or some set amount or some set of scope that you hope to get to. But the nature of software development is that you can't be sure of what you're going to get for the money. And when we try to do it that way, it doesn't work. And so, but then you do break it up into chunks. So we, like every 2 weeks, we agree what work they're going to do in the next 2 weeks. And then they have to deliver that at the end of the 2 weeks. And you could attach
money to that, like that could be invoiced separately. Or, you know, there's different ways to handle it there. At the federal level, I know sometimes that when they do fixed price, have clearly identified like the full contract is this amount, but each iteration is billed separately and paid separately depending on if it's completed. Yeah.
Is that what you mean by incentivized to code faster when you were talking about fixed price?
Yeah, so if you agree with the vendor that they're going to do a certain amount of work each sprint, like maybe they've established a baseline that they're completing 25 points per sprint, right? And remember I talked about a story, it could be 1 point or 2 points. If they complete 30 or 35 in a sprint, then you can give them a bonus. Like you can, on the federal level, sometimes they'll give them like an extra percentage of payment if they exceed. I've also heard on the federal level that if they release early, they have given incentives. We haven't experimented with incentives on the project I'm working on, but I know that at the federal level, they're paying for like releasing early, but early like in 3 months instead of in 4 months, rather than like a year or 2 years, like really keeping the amounts of work more manageable to hold the team more accountable.
So we're negotiating a software agreement right now, and it includes software licenses, professional services to configure as we need them, and customize, and then maintenance and support. So for the first year, when we expect the customization to occur, we have milestones to find and deliverables, and the vendor won't be paid until they submit or they reach the milestone and we accept it.
Yeah.
The deliverable. So how is that more or less the actual concept without calling it agile? How does this differ from what you're talking about?
Yeah, really, it maps very well to it. I think to really make it agile, what I would encourage you to do is to leave yourself flexible to what's going to come in milestones. How many milestones do you have? Maybe like 8. So leave yourself open to what's going to be in milestones 2 through 8. Like define milestone 1, and then or maybe even 1 and 2, and then as you're moving through them, then write 3 and 4. And then as you're moving through those, write 5 and 6. And the reason to do that is because you want to take whatever was built in 1 and 2, which should be released and ready to go, or at least ready to test, and test it with real users. Put it in front of your users, whether that's your colleagues or the public, and see how they respond to it. And that will actually give you incredibly valuable information about if you're on the right track for what you thought you might want to do in 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. And if you retain that flexibility with the vendor and tell the vendor, like, we're not going to agree on what's in 3 and 4 until we're done with 1 and 2, or until we're done with 1, then you have the ability to test with real users and evolve your product design or your needs as you go. And you probably won't go wildly off into left field. Like, you probably have a pretty good idea of what you need, but Agile gives you the flexibility and reduces the risk that you got your assumptions wrong about what you're going to want in milestones 7 and 8, and you can validate as you go by testing with users.
Well, I just don't know how OCA would respond on that. If you leave milestones 3 and 4 undefined when you turn in a contract for approval.
Well, the one thing that I did hear her say was that the whole scope has been defined in the beginning, just the deliverables that are so when you put the RFP out, you've got, I heard one vendor potentially and one scope of work, but almost like the modules are released and you begin to work on the modules, then you define the next one, or you adjust.
Exactly.
If necessary.
Exactly.
So, it doesn't sound completely out of the box, because we would have turned in the same procurement out in public, and you would have gotten the responses. You would have put basically the rules to the game out initially for everyone to understand and compete based on those rules. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of jumping ahead, just we're in the contract stage.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah, so it's like, instead of saying in module or iteration or milestone 2 or 3, you're going to deliver these features like exporting your email. At the beginning, you just say, like, you're going to deliver a set of design and development work, and like, we'll use it however we want. And when we get there, once we get closer, we'll start to decide what we want to use it for. But what we're buying is your work. We're buying you doing agile development at maybe an established price or an established speed, but we don't know what we want you to build with it yet, because we need to test with users and learn as we go. And so we know that we're building like a calendar system or a reservation system, but what you're going to do in a particular month or week or what it looks like, we want to retain their flexibility to evolve that as we work together rather than having to try to write it all down before we even release our RFP. Right.
And it's kind of used in the construction world a little bit, or kind of like design builds. So it's kind of taking a little bit of lessons learned over there and bringing it into technology.
Interesting. Cool.
In your experience, does the agile process take less time, more time? Does it take less staff, more staff? What is it, if you compare the two completed projects, what would you say in the course of life?
Yeah. I think it's intended to be much cheaper if you do it right. And in the private sector certainly costs less than waterfall development, and I think that's what government's finding as well. Of course, if things go wrong, that is not. If you execute on it as intended, then it saves a lot of money. In terms of saving time, I think the overall length of the project may still be quite long. It takes a long time to build good software, especially big complex projects, but it will save you time in the sense that you won't build things that your users don't need. You won't build things that you then have to redo later. Like you're never going to redo work in Agile because nothing is built unless you it's so small. It's like the pieces are so small that you can really sign off on like the right work is being done, rather than having them build it and then having to do rework. And it will save time in the sense that you'll have something live sooner. On a good Agile project, you usually have something live in like 3 months. It might be this tiny little piece, right? That you're then gonna build on to and add to. But part of the approach of Agile, which is less related to procurement and more related to the software approach, is that like, let's not try to build the whole thing. Like, let's pick a piece and build it and get it out and get people using it, and then we can plug in this piece and then add this, and and at some point you'll have to come back and rework the first part. And that'll be okay because like we've learned something as we went because it's been out in the real world being used by real people and they've been responding to it and telling us what they want. So the other part of your question was staff time. And I think the answer is that it requires a lot less staff time in the process of getting the RFP out because you're not doing like discovery or requirements stuff at that point. But it requires, I think, more staff time in a good way as you're designing and developing. Staff really has to roll their sleeves up and get involved because every 2 to 4 weeks, you're gonna have to tell them what you want them to build. And then as they build it, in that 2 to 4 weeks, you have to look at what they're delivering and approve it or reject it. Instead of like once every 6 months or once a year, or them coming back to you with some huge thing. So, yeah. But it's in a good way. You have way more control. They're not off doing something in the corner in the dark and then they just bring it back to you and it's all wrong. Like, yeah.
Hey, thanks, Ashley. I think this has been really great so far. I was wondering, so you mentioned that one of the great things about this is that it's good for when you're building your own customized solution versus like off the shelf, right?
Yeah.
What if a department doesn't know what they want, like whether there exists an off-the-shelf solution or a customized solution? They're not really sure. Like, how do they address that in their RFP in such a way to leave themselves open to being able to like use Agile should it turn out that they want something more customized versus like understanding what an off-the-shelf solution might be that actually wants that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would probably turn to you guys for thoughts on this too. My general thought is that they can't be in the same RFP. Like, you should do your research on if there's an off-the-shelf solution. Maybe that means like just doing research, like Googling and meeting people or putting out an RFI, a request for information or something like that. And then if you decide there isn't, then you can do an RFP for a custom build. But I don't think you can really effectively put it together. But I don't know. What do you guys think about this? Maybe even outside of software this applies.
Yeah, I mean, I think RFI is sort of that's the case. If you know you need to build something custom, then it's a safe bet to just go ahead with an RFP. But an RFI, I mean, I don't know actually the timeline of RFIs, but you could probably make it a pretty short one so that it's more of this, that's your discovery phase to understand what's out there.
We also have a new digital services team at the Department of Technology, and we can help you talk about the build versus buy decision. It's not always like an easy, clear answer, but we can try to help.
I have a question for Rob.
Sure.
Regarding cooperative purchasing.
Mhm.
In your research, did you determine that cooperative purchasing might lend itself more for commodities or emergency procurements, or did it work best for certain types of procurements?
I think it's probably better suited for commodities. So commodities spanning the board from stationary all the way through to heavy duty trucks. It's probably less suitable for professional services. But having said that, there are some co-ops out there that do have professional service providers on contract that you, if it's a service that you're interested in, it might pay to actually do some research to see if that's something that you might be interested in leveraging. But for the most part, co-ops are really there to help governments leverage collective purchasing power when they're purchasing commodities.
So for emergency procurements, it would be.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely an option to look into.
Oh, one more question. Yes, in the back.
Hi, I just started with the city this week, actually.
Cool. Welcome to the city family. Yay.
One of the things that probably practices.
Oh, cool. Which department are you in? Awesome.
Software like Jira or Team Foundations into the RFP and get folks really
Is the vendor already using Scrum on their own?
No, I don't think this is only
Yeah, that'll be hard. I think it's really hard to help a team transition to Agile or Scrum, and especially since you aren't there at the vendor, you're here. Would love to chat with you afterward about that. I have some experience with it. I think it's hard though. We are using, I'm not sure about rolling in Jira or the other tool that you mentioned. I know that you can roll in like licensing into bigger professional services contracts, so I imagine it's possible. We're using Pivotal Tracker, which is free and really, really wonderful. You have to pay if you want to make your projects private, but it's all sunshineable anyway, so we just make them public. And like you can't really, you'd have to know the URL, so it's not really a big deal, but we use that and really like it.
The structure of an RFP itself, like my sense is you've given us somewhat of an outline in these handouts.
There's one there.
So the handouts that were at the back of the room, one is related to cooperative purchasing and one is related to performance-based contracting. So, but in terms of a structure of an RFP for Agile, I definitely think Ashley has some content that she might be able to share with you in the future.
Yeah, we should share the bus RFP and the Agile RFP.
Yeah. Why don't we add it? Did everyone get here through the Eventbrite? We can add the links on Eventbrite.
So you can provide us a kind of a structure of what an RFP would look like using the Agile approach?
Yes.
And does OCA, have they adopted that? I mean, do they?
We're doing it for the housing portal. I know there's some other projects in the city that are doing Agile work. Department of the Environment has done it. Department of Technology has done it for some projects.
It's all gone through OCA.
Everything's gone through OCA. So whatever you put together for your particular need, obviously you'll have to work with OCA to make sure it works.
I think to Kofo's point is, working with them early and getting their input on it before you sort of start going through a lot of the steps, like working with some of the templates that we have, starting there and saying, hey, can we work it out with them? So it's not a surprise at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Question about the STIR program, maybe a little. You mentioned 2014, you had your first batch of a group of folks, and then the procurement part of it after the prototype development was a little bit of a struggle, I guess you'd say. And now you have your second batch in 2016. Have any of the STIR prototype projects gotten into a contract? And if yes, how does that work? Or I I believe they get like a 1-year license, right? A free license, is that my understanding of how the STIR works? And
Right.
After that 1 year's up, I'm trying to figure out how that moves forward.
Yeah, so we're still in the last kind of couple of weeks of the STIR program.
Right.
So, but we are seeing very good signs that the department will be working. At least I know in one case there is a contract that's in place or in process. So how the program was built was that the startups applied through this RFP process. They went through the 16-week program on a pro bono basis. After that, if the department is at the discretion of the department, if the department wants to move forward with that startup, they can get a free license using whatever was built during the program. And then at the end of that, it's basically, you can read that STIR contracting guide to get into the specifics, but it basically says at the end of that year, the startup and the department can sort of negotiate terms on a discounted basis for the department.
And because the startup kind of came through the RFP process.
Exactly.
You've already.
It's already gone through the
you've already
competitive
gone.
bid.
Right,
Yeah.
so you can kind of have the one-on-one.
Exactly.
negotiation with that.
Yeah, it's basically a try before you buy competitive process.
All right, well, in the interest of everyone's time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. So can we get a round of applause? Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. As we mentioned, we'll be sending some resources out through the Eventbrite. And Krista, you had a question you wanted to ask the audience, right? We wanted to see who's from the city.
Oh yeah, who's from the city of San Francisco? Oh,
Okay.
And who's not?
cool. Okay, I think that was everyone. Great.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.